Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Mind of Cy Marie. I'm your host, Cy Marie Johnson, and today we are exploring the intersection of influence, ambition, and the paths we choose to take. Joining us at the table today is the author of Power and Way, Paul Locander. Paul, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me here at the table.
To start us off, looking at the core of your work, what was the specific spark or personal experience that compelled you to write Power and Way?
Well, it's a personal experience that really goes way back. It was probably around 11 or 12 or so when I began to notice an emotional and intellectual disconnect with my father. And it grew over time, and I was exasperated as I got older and became a teenager, and certainly did not take an interest in classics by Will Durant and all the heavy novels my dad loved to plow through. But it was right around that time when I really started what I thought was failing to hit a lot of the unspoken marks my father had laid out for me. So the disappointment factor was already beginning to gel right at that time. So the drift between my father and I was very early set. It was something that my older brother had experienced as well. Interestingly enough, I always thought it had something to do with me, and it wasn't until I expanded the script into a novel was I really able to work out what was exactly going on. And I was able to, after I finished the novel, came to the conclusion that it wasn't just me that was the problem. My father and I were just very different people, and he handled it, that disconnect and that chasm or canyon between us, far better than I did.
So, in your writing, how do you manage the delicate balance of pacing to keep readers engaged without rushing the emotional development of your characters?
So that's where a background in screenwriting really helps. In writing for film, as you may know, each page of the script has to always drive the story forward. Unless you're someone like Quentin Tarantino who can take 5 to 10 pages of a screenplay to get to a certain point, screenplay structure and pacing can be completely unforgiving. So I learned early on to embed the emotional character development in with dialogue, scenes, and plot points as much as possible. That's a lesson I carried over into the novel. And in book form, I was allowed a lot more latitude and page space to expand the characters' emotional development even further. But I still carried a measured approach and a sense of urgency to make that development engaging while also pushing the story forward.
So, your protagonists often face internal conflicts regarding their heritage. How did you build their psychological blueprints to make them feel relatable?
I wrote it through personality building. That's really the only way I've been able to really build out all of my characters, be them primary, secondary, and so on. We're all products of who we are, who our parents are or were, the environment we were raised in and surrounded by. So each of my characters, protagonists and antagonists, have a developed backstory that helps define how they're wired. For example, my father was raised entirely by women, which gave him no usable baseline on how to deal with a son. And he had no idea what to do with me or my brother. And that established a rather solid state of aloofness and disinterest on his part. And that is something I carried over into the novel.
Secrets and lineage play a major role in your narrative. How do these hidden truths challenge the trust and dynamics of your secondary characters?
Well, it's quite the cause and effect seesaw that occurs in the interpersonal relationships the primary characters have with the secondary characters and vice versa. For example, when a secret surfaces, say within the novel or in the screenplay, and depending upon what that secret is, who the secondary character is, and their personality, the very nature of the secret can invoke trust or outright suspicion, anger, fury, or a simple roll of the eyes. And that's part of the fun in writing, finding out how these characters react, how they interact, or letting them really shine on their own. For me, secondary characters are often the most fun to write, as they oddly possess the least amount of character restraint that primary characters can be saddled with. That's a very interesting question, and certainly not one I was expecting. As you probably already figured out, we live in a very odd and surreal time right now, one that hasn't been seen since the 1930s in the United States, and certainly not one I've seen in my lifetime as a citizen of the United States itself. I naively thought that we were always the good guys when I was much younger. And even into some stages in my adulthood, I always thought that we were the good guys and that deep down, through all of our blemishes in politics and policy, we could always be trusted to do what was right in the end. That we as the United States of America, we were always the gold standard for the world to follow. We were the heroes, always hoping those who really couldn't help themselves. And right now that's gone. It's been driven away by a minority darkness relishing in ignorance, cruelty, and horror. I know that's a little bit off tangent, but it's something I'm having trouble reconciling it today as a US citizen. We're all bearing witness to a terrible story that hasn't reached its end yet. And we've all lost our privacy when it was handed over to Elon Musk by those who had a responsibility and the power to defend it. So, yes, what is going on today is and will have a future impact on the future novels that we'll be writing.
Well, I completely agree with everything you said, and it's a very hollowing, sobering feeling many of us are kind of experiencing. But
Yeah.
back to your book. So, your style has been described as very atmospheric. Do you see your story unfolding like a film while you draft? And I think being a screenplay writer, you probably do. Are you focused primarily on the internal prose or more of that kind of cinematic viewpoint?
It's the cinematic viewpoint. It's definitely like a film. For myself, the prose comes as I write down what I'm seeing in a very specific sense. I will either inflate or style or artistically build the prose after I've written that first draft. So, what I'm seeing in a specific scene or in dialogue or what the characters are wanting to communicate to the reader, I always visualize it cinematically, which can be quite a headache at times for me because sometimes I can't write it down fast enough and I'll forget a particular moment. But I always write very cinematically because I always envision stories in a very cinematic sense.
I love that. I'm very similar. Every storyteller has a favorite kind of plot twist or maybe a red herring. Was there a particular moment in Power and Way that was especially rewarding to craft that might have maybe threw your readers off in a different path than was going to be the final ending?
There was, and not to give the story away completely for those who haven't read it yet, there's a moment I had to choose between damning a character for what he had done or what he had not done. That was tricky to craft because I also wanted to ensure the story didn't follow that well worn path of predictability. Because when you read a story that's got a predictable plot and topic and path, it's just not a very entertaining book and it's to some degree disposable. To me, the best stories always turns right when you're expecting it to go left and vice versa.
So, what is your personal philosophy on the perfect ending? Do you prefer to tie up every loose thread or leave the reader with a lingering question?
Uh, yeah, that's a really great question. And to be honest, I really believe it's specific to the story itself and the characters who inhabit it. Early on, I really hated ambiguous endings, mostly because I hate things that are unresolved. I'm probably, to be honest, still a little bit like that today, but I've really grown an appreciation for giving audiences the power to come to their own conclusions. For me, that's really a homage to the reader, in my opinion, or to someone who's watching films such as Interstellar or, say, Inception. Our audiences and our readers are very, very smart, and they certainly deserve to be treated as such. And there is a very unique power for us as writers and storytellers to impart that power in a way to the reader to write their own ending for this story. And to me, that's just, sometimes when you can do that and pull it off successfully, that's very, very powerful.
I agree. So, you have a unique way of exploring human potential. How does your personal philosophy on growth bleed into the themes of your fiction?
Well, again, I think it goes back to really a lot of that personality building, that personality blueprint that you referred to earlier. As you build these characters and as you build their backgrounds and you build their lives and you build their interpersonal relationships, their characters, their personalities will bleed into other characters or it will bleed into other portions of the story. So my personal philosophy is that you need to let it bleed as much as possible because people are going to be people, no matter if they're in your story or out there in the real world. And you're actually quite compelled to allow that growth to bleed into all parts of your story.
So, tell us about your creative process. Do you ever rewrite the scripts for your characters or find that they might be taking the story in a different direction than you initially envisioned?
Not not as much. And for me, because I've had say a script for Power and Way, and I've got scripts for other few books I'm going to be working on. A lot of that development, that creative process was already established as the script stands as a skeleton for for the novel, for the story. So I already had very well developed characters when I started writing the novel for Power and Way. So, when writing the novel, I was able to really expand and inflate a lot of the characters within the book. And that introduced all kinds of new territory I had to explore and had to actually wrap up and put in the story, which really helped the overall tale in itself.
So, how has your approach to the first draft changed since you first began your journey as a writer?
Not all that much, to be honest. Having a screenplay again, especially one as well defined as Power and Way, really established the skeleton for me. What was a proven story. I knew the story worked. The immediate challenge itself was actually doing the expansion of the screenplay into a full blown novel. So I really wasn't looking at changing a first draft, but more of inflating the story into the novel that it could and eventually became.
For aspiring authors who are currently feeling stuck in the middle of their manuscript, what would be your best advice for them to find the story's heartbeat again?
Sometimes you just have to walk away from it and stay away from it as long as you need to. I've done that many, many times. If the issue is plot related, sometimes diving into a new book can sometimes jar things loose, or watching a film or streaming a series you've never seen before can unlock unique ideas you never even knew were there. It's easy, at least for me, to get hemmed into your story's world and see only the walls you erected in the universe you created, and then following those defined rules to the point where you can't think your way out of them. So, venturing into something new, seeing something new, reading something new can certainly help clear those cobwebs or give you at least enough of a nudge to dig your way out of being stuck. If you're simply mired in the story, typing words that just dig you in deeper into the mud and you're getting bored, you really have to step away from it and spend some time thinking why you're stuck, how you got there, and what you need to change in your story's heartbeat to keep it from flatlining and to get you out of the mud.
I agree. I call that refilling your creative pot.
That's a good way of doing it. Good way.
Is the journey of your current characters a closed chapter, or do you feel there are more secrets in the world of Power and Way left to explore?
For some characters in Power and Way, their journeys do come to a close. But there are others whose stories continue on, and I'm really looking forward to exploring those journeys with them. My wife is also very excited about it, and I've had readers who have read Power and Way and are very eager for the next novel. So I'm going to be very fortunate to spend more time with characters I really love.
So, finally, for the creator who feels their voice might be too niche, what is your advice for finding that sweet spot where unique storytelling meets a broad audience?
That's a that's a tough question, actually. For me, I think every writer, be it a novelist, a poet, a news article writer, screenwriters, everybody has a very unique voice. And I haven't dealt or dove too much into the romantic fantasy novel arena, so I really can't speak to how they perform in a sort of a niche environment. I think what makes all authors unique is their individual voice, how they build and style their prose, how they write a scene, how they develop their characters, and how they reach back into their own personalities and their history and their past to infuse those memories, those personalities into their characters. That to me keeps people from being too niche.
Paul, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. Thank you for sharing your journey and your insights with us.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was great to be on the show.
For those of you listening, you can find Power and Way wherever books are sold. I will also have a link in the show description. Thank you for tuning into the Mind to Simery. And remember, until next time, the mind is the most important story that we'll ever tell.